Muy buenas tardes, señoras y señores, einen schönen guten Tag, guten Nachmittag, meine Damen und Herren. Muchas gracias por haber venido en ese tiempo tan maravilloso. Vielen Dank, dass Sie bei diesem hervorragenden Wetter gekommen sind. Welcome to the Institute of Cervantes. I'm very happy that you're here, pleased that you're here, and enjoy the weather within this little room and with the expositions, and also with our guests, with Rob Davis, hello, and Paul Gravett. So, very welcome to the Instituto Cervantes, muy bienvenidos todos. Wir werden die Veranstaltung auf Englisch führen, nicht sowas abgesprochen, und ich möchte mich ganz kurz bei dem Comicfestival, bei Heiner Lünnstedt und Michael Kompa ganz besonders bedanken dafür, dass sie uns die Gäste heute den ganzen Nachmittag vorstellen. Also wir werden 3 Veranstaltungen haben. Bleiben Sie hier, wir werden versuchen auch Flüssiges zu bekommen, damit Sie das durchstehen können, und ich wünsche Ihnen jetzt viel Vergnügen mit dem Gespräch zwischen Paul Gravett und Rob Davis. Und ich übergebe das Wort an Michael Kompa vom Comicfestival. Thanks.
Ja, grüß Gott auch nochmal vom Comicfestival. Ich freue mich sehr, dass ihr alle hier erschienen seid, trotz der Hitze, aber ich auf den Weg gemacht habe vor einer Kongresshalle hierher. Es ist jetzt das 3. Mal, dass wir beim Comicfestival mit dem Instituto Cervantes zusammenarbeiten, und das ist für uns ein ganz, ganz toller Partner geworden und eine, ja, möchte ich fast sagen, richtige Freundschaft. Und insofern sind wir auch bei uns am Festival so ein bisschen eingetaucht in die spanische Comic-Szene, haben viele Freunde bei spanischen Comic-Künstlern und ja, spätestens alle 2 Jahre, meistens sogar dazwischen, machen wir hier keine Ausstellungen, und die sind wir hier gerne vor Ort. Das Tolle ist auch bei den Gesprächen, dass, wenn die in spanischer Sprache sind, simultan gedolmetscht werden können. Also dass wir hier wirklich ein Niveau haben, das eigentlich kaum ein anderes Comic-Festival in Europa hat. Das heißt also, wenn ihr die anderen Gespräche heute Nachmittag hier noch genießen wollt, wird das eine sehr tolle, sehr spannende Geschichte sein, die man auf den Kopfhörern dann auch eben auf Deutsch verfolgen kann. Unsere jetzigen Gäste sind Rob Davis und Paul Gravett. Rob ist zwar Brite, passt aber trotzdem wie die Faust aufs Auge ins Instituto Cervantes, weil er eine Graphic Novel über Don Quixote gemacht hat. Das Buch schlechthin von Miguel Cervantes, also was ist besser hier geeignet als diese Graphic Novel. Rob ist aber auch insgesamt ein sehr, sehr spannender Vertreter der britischen Comic-Szene. Insofern weiß ich nicht, ob nur über das Buch gesprochen wird oder ob er noch andere Arbeiten von sich vorstellen wird. Aber ich denke, das wird eine sehr spannende Geschichte. Wir freuen uns sehr, dass wir unseren Freund und Partner Paul Gravett hier dabei haben. Paul ist der Experte für das britische Comics. Oder ich möchte fast sagen, für Comics allgemein. Er hat ein Buch geschrieben, 1001 Comic, den man gelesen haben sollte, bevor man stirbt. Und ich weiß jetzt nicht, ob der Don Quixote was the Don Quixote graphic novel in your book?
It wasn't.
So you should write a new.
It was number 1002.
I think you should write a new book once 1002, then Don Quixote will be decided. So, ja, genießt das Talking Panel jetzt. Danach haben wir Paco Roca und Jordi Lafebvre, auch 2 Sachen, auf die wir uns sehr freuen. Toll, dass es hier eine Ausstellung wieder gibt mit Paco Roca. Toll, dass wir eine Ausstellung mit Jordi haben. Es gibt im Anschluss, ich weiß nicht, bei Egmont, sind Egmont noch hier?
Kommen noch auch, es gibt spanische Bücher und deutsche.
Okay,
und
es gibt hier dann eine Signieraktion im Anschluss, das war mir noch wichtig, genau. Also es gibt hier nachher noch eine Signieraktion, und auch Jordi als auch Paco werden auch im Anschluss an ihre Talks noch signieren. Also viel Spaß, thank you Rob, thank you Paul, enjoy.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. I'm not going to speak lots of Spanish, so I thought you could say that. And hola, welcome. Yeah, we're here to celebrate the genius of Cervantes in the Institute Cervantes here in Munich. And it's the story of Don Quixote reincarnated in graphic novel form. And appearing, by the way, now in German from Egmont, so copies will be available by the end of this talk. If you haven't picked it up already, you should. And I believe you'll be doing signings probably here.
Yeah, if I have my pen with me,
yeah.
I can draw you a picture.
Great, good. And I suppose one of the things to start with would be, what was your first exposure to Cervantes? Did you come across it in school, or how did you first read Don Quixote?
Not in school. Well, I don't know. I tried to read and failed.
Yeah,
I find it incredibly hard work to read the book. There was a very old English translation which was very difficult to read.
Because I heard that for the 400th anniversary, like in 2005, which because it came out in 60, the first part. In fact, now we're in 2015, it's the 400th anniversary of part 2. That there was a new translation done.
Emily Grossman. Yeah.
And was that a better translation?
Yeah, well, it was a clearer translation. But one of the things I did when I finally, after maybe 10 years, and I attempted the book twice, I finally got into the book, and I read just a few different translations of it. So I was fascinated with the ideas in the book, and the translation from Emily Grossman is the one that exposed it to a much wider audience in the United States and in the UK.
Which shows you just how important interpretation, translation, including graphic novelization, is for making a classic book accessible. Because these books otherwise just can become rather kind of dusty things you feel you ought to have read, but you haven't read.
Well, that was part of the motivation for doing this as a graphic novel, was that I thought it was one of the greatest books ever written, and in the English language there just weren't enough people reading it, and so I thought, make this is the graphic novel. The form of comics is just the most instant reading communication. It's it's instantaneous. As soon as you see it, you know exactly what is happening, as opposed to a text where you have to penetrate the text and read it. So that was the ambition. Obviously, it's 1,000 pages. I had to break it down into 2 volumes, 150 pages each.
Well, it was originally in 2 months, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So that sort of natural 2 month structure.
It was part of my proposal to the publisher, because if you're familiar with the book, then you know that in the second volume, the characters meet people who've read the first volume, and I wanted to create the same feeling for readers, so they would get the first volume and then read it, and then when they start reading the second volume, they'd be looking at the book here and thinking, hang on, how can the people that are in this book have read this book, which is an extraordinary.
Well, in that sense, it makes far more sense to adapt it in 2 books. I would imagine a film version. We all know what's that Terry Gilliam's aborted attempts to
and Orson Welles.
Orson Welles, of course. I mean, was he defeated? I know I've seen.
It
has to be 2 films. It has to be Don Quixote 1 and Don Quixote 2.
Well, the thing is now that it doesn't matter so much now, because people are used to it as a complete work, and also we're more used to the idea of metafiction and postmodernism, which is crazy to think that 400 years ago Cervantes was creating the novel and also deconstructing what a novel can be in the same book at the same time.
Well, the kind of fine line between genius and madness, I think we probably could say in a way, because it is a sort of way of thinking that probably no few people had at that time. It was really so innovative.
But it's an odd thing. It's a contemporary with Shakespeare. They were both doing these sort of extraordinary things at the same time without really being in contact. But
I don't tend to be that expert on Shakespeare. But I mean, is there much metafictional stuff happening in Shakespeare?
Well, Midsummer Night's Dream.
Of course, it's that.
The play within the play, and that's one of the great things about Don Quixote, and one of the things that gets left out in a lot of abridged versions and versions for children is they take out all the stories within stories in the book. So you're left with a straightforward story about an old man and his idiot friend, trotting around in the middle of nowhere. Whereas it's what gives such context and depth to the book is that there are so many adventures and stories within stories, and some of those stories then enter the main part of Don Quixote's adventures. So it's very important to include them. So
the term, I think, it's picaresque, isn't it? And the idea of sort of a storytelling that isn't a straight A to Z sort of typical Hollywood story arc where you just know it's going to drive through, where it can wander around and be
right. Well, that's
one of them.
That's actually what Cervantes was sending up.
Yes,
was the tradition of the picaresque.
Yes, but also parody. So one can imagine. I mean, do we know, just not to focus only on Wells and Gilliam, but do you have any idea of how they were? I wasn't aware of at least what Wells was proposing, perhaps. And could cinema do this? Is it even a medium that really could do this now?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
I actually think that what would be interesting would be if somebody like Pixar did it rather than a live action film. I'd like to see a Pixar version, you know, because I just think the visual comedy.
Yeah.
But I suppose I'm biased because that's one of the things that I took from the book is there's so much slapstick humour.
That's wonderful.
And yeah, I'd love to see it given that kind of treatment that the Pixar films do. It'd be wonderful.
And then in terms of the stages of adapting a mammoth book like this, it must be pretty daunting to edit. I've seen this done where somebody was adapting a book. I think it was when Paul Karasik, he was adapting a short story by Paul Auster. He did a story called City of Glass. You might have seen the book that came out of that. Mazzucchelli was the artist, and Karasik was the adapter. And he had a system where he was kind of highlighting, this is the original text that I must keep in, this is one colour. Another colour pen was maybe the scenes that must appear. Basically, he started to kind of leave out the stuff that wasn't going to make the final cut. How did you start with the physical text?
Well, mine was a larger experiment than that. So I had to allocate a number of comic pages to a scene.
Right.
And then I'd measure that against the amount of text.
Yeah.
But one of the decisions I made early on was that to a reader 400 years ago, it would have been absolutely apparent that Don Quixote is speaking like an old book.
Yeah.
He doesn't speak like the people around him at all. He sounds ridiculous.
Yeah.
Whereas when you read a modern translation, the big gap has disappeared because they all sound like they're speaking in some very ancient kind of way.
Yeah.
So I kept Don Quixote's speech as this archaic, old-fashioned way of speaking, and brought all the other characters up to date, so their voices are much more modern, much more colloquial.
Right. So
also that helped because it means that so Don Quixote rattles on for great big long speeches, whereas everybody else I could bring it back to they were speaking normally. So again, which makes it funnier because he can't say anything without rattling on for on and on and on and on and on.
So you immediately had a linguistic solution.
Yeah, that was one shortcut. The other one was, as we were talking about the stories within stories, I decided that they all had to take place on a single page.
Yeah, because that's the great, you have it as a unit.
So I drew them in a different style, and they would just take place on a single page. So it would almost be like an insert if you have a newspaper and you'd have a cartoon in a newspaper. So when you're reading through, you suddenly see, oh, this is a break, But again, obviously, because Cervantes did some peculiar things with storytelling, I also then had to bring characters out of those little cartoons and make them appear in the main story. So basically I had...
so these are the strengths of comics in many ways. Some of the things you can
there are shortcuts. And also something that takes 2 pages to describe in words can just take a single image. So that was very helpful. I did a similar approach though, and I had 2 different translations that I was working with for the most part, and I 1,000 pages, and I had squares around certain parts of text. I had notations down the side which would maybe indicate how I was going to compress a scene right down to a simple exchange, and also I had to lose some bits from the book, which was immediately a controversial thing, as people say. One of the things that
because it's called it's never complete. Well, not here, but it's
in the UK, although that was a bit of a play on words because it was the version of you can complete the book, So what was I saying?
So having to leave material out. Was there ever a discussion? Well, actually, you can have an extra 50 pages if you wanted them. Or did you want to?
No. But necessity is the mother of invention, and having a structure that you're forced to work with it often brings extraordinary results.
Yeah,
so I left out at the end of the first volume. There's a major part of the book about the prisoner. Now, if you know Cervantes' story, of course, he was in prison twice. And
why was he in prison?
Well, one was during the war and one was for not paying his taxes later on. So it's a big thematically for him.
Yeah,
it was
important. So
what I actually did, without even really realising it, was I had Cervantes' voice comes. I don't know if you can see in your own, but on the first page, Cervantes' voice comes out of the page through a little cell window. So the theme of being imprisoned is throughout the whole book. And so instead of, normally in comics you have captions that are run over the top where the author is speaking, but Cervantes is more than the author, he's the third main character in the book. It's like a slight change from having a caption with text on to having a little cell window which pops up throughout the book, and as if he's speaking out of the page, and so it begins and ends with this little cell window with the author trapped inside.
What's quite interesting about that, you say with the author trapped inside, but you also slightly play with that, don't you?
Yeah.
Because looking at how you have to think how that balloon could have gone behind the bar, for example.
Yes.
The balloon actually, only just as you noticed.
Yeah.
So which side of the bar is the balloon coming
Well, it's
from?
part of the play. Part of the play of the book is that it could be that it's us that become trapped inside the book. Once you read it and it becomes a big part of your life, then you're also trapped in this story. And there's also the fact that, despite the fact that Cervantes actually wanted to be a playwright, he wanted to do theatre, he will forever be remembered for this. So this is the book that encapsulates him, and the reason why you have an institute named after him and all the rest of it is because of this book.
So he did also write plays.
Yeah, that's really what he wanted to do, because that was it's a bit like the difference between comics and movies.
Yeah.
If you wanted to be really big and successful, you wrote for the theatre.
Like
You didn't write like Shakespeare.
Yeah.
There was no a culture of novel writing. So he was doing something quite oddball, really. And in fact, the books tended to be those kind of picaresques that we were talking about. They weren't novels at all. They were just
rambling.
Yeah.
Well, I think in a way picaresque makes me think a little bit of, well, makes me think of American, this is office, for example, American pulps, where you were paid like a cent for every 100 words. You just basically wrote as long as you fill the pages. It also makes me think a little bit of some of these picaresque Marvel and DC superhero stories, which basically we know are going to go on forever.
Right.
And terribly tortuously complicated, but they don't really give you a great deal.
No.
Yeah.
But there is there are lots of different ways that you can read and approach Don Quixote as a character, and one of them is if you think of the idea of the superhero, where it's somebody who puts on a different costume to go out and have these adventures, that is effectively Don Quixote. And then if you think of the history of the superhero characters, then what happened is they got deconstructed in the 80s and 90s and became old and slightly mad, and was seen as, well, the idea, if you're going to dress up like that, you're actually insane.
Yes.
And so, but again, Cervantes did that whole art, creating an idea and deconstructing it, all in one book. 400
years ago.
Yeah.
And he has a sidekick. He has such a
exactly, yeah. It's not quite Robin, but he moves a bit slower.
And in terms of the styles that you adopted, how did you arrive at those? Because they had to be thought out obviously from the beginning. You had to figure out, okay, this is, because you have got a look to your work that's kind of cartoon, blockish, distinctive. That was also the signature style that runs through the whole book. But then you can come up with all kinds of other styles and panel layouts that enable you to create these diversions and alternatives.
There are two aspects to the majority of the artwork, which you occasionally get glimpses of. So it was, so I drew it in pencil.
I think we're in a prison cell here, actually, Rob. We're looking up. That's what we can see. We can't see the whole book.
So I drew it in pencil so that it had a kind of texture and a roughness, because that's La Mancha, that's the kind of world that Don Quixote and Sancho are living in. And the pencil just gave everything the kind of the coarseness and the roughness. And then I used a very flat digital colour, because it meant I could use very bold colours that sort of captured something of the light in Spain. So there are lots of bright, different coloured skies. It was just create a kind of temperature, like we're feeling here now. And But yeah, then within that, there are short stories in there. If you look, you see that they're done in quite flat, decorative ways. So again, they don't have the same three-dimensionality and depth as the main part of the story. So it feels like they are a story within a story. They're a different format, and they usually I would take the colour. Say the colour from the scene where it's happening, and just brighten and simplify that palette. So again, it echoes it. Or I would run opposite. So there's a scene which I will quickly find. There's
Turn to page.
Okay. So on page 48, there's even from here you can see there's a very hot scene where they're set with the goat herders around a campfire, and they tell the story here, and the story is in this bold green, and then they return to the campfire, and the story is completed, and the next morning they travel to meet the characters that were in that story, and so the morning is painted in similar colours, so it's as if they're entering the world of the story that they were just hearing the night before.
It's worth mentioning, I know this might sound terribly technical, but if you're looking at those pages, you'll also notice, I think, I'm wrong, but I think, yeah, but sometimes you use also the outlines or borders on the panels to help distinguish different settings of the story. That's true, isn't it? Another way of distinguishing. And of course, this is drawn in a much more cartoony, it's like also loony kind of style, which clearly distinguishes it. Yeah, and of course, the thing about comics as well is that you can see it all at once. I mean, presumably when you read the book, which is all text, it's not so clearly demarcated.
Yeah, but there are visual signifiers.
Of course,
but yeah. Again, like I say, it's a peculiar thing. I get asked how faithful is your Don Quixote to the original, and it's a peculiar question if you think about it, because it's very difficult to imagine how the book was intended by Cervantes or how it was read in the first 50 years of people reading it. I mean, how did it feel to read that? I mean, we have changed so much that we're already we're looking at it through a different lens anyway. So for me, the faithful wasn't so much a technical thing as being faithful to the spirit. So that's what you take as a reader. You understand the spirit of the book, and so I tried to stay faithful to the spirit of the book, rather than trying to fit everything in as if I'm itemising it like a shopping list. I've got that scene, he's in, she's in.
Everything's tick boxes. Or sometimes, as you say, boiling it down to a very simple plot, which of course is a plot is just a piece of land. I mean, it's not the richness of a document.
Well, and also, it's the book is a translation. This is what Cervantes says. He tells us that this isn't his book. It's some mysterious. Some mysterious Moor wrote this book, and I'm just translating, and then he loses halfway through. He hasn't even got enough pages to finish the story. He has to go and find more, and then he gets a Moor who's on the street to translate, and so we have no idea how faithful his translation is. So long before I started messing around with it, he's just saying the whole thing's just been messed around with it. He's constantly telling us this is the truth, this is the truth, and then in the next sentence he tells us that it's impossible to know what the truth is because it's a translation of a translation of a.
But I mean, in doing that itself, and even questioning that maybe truth isn't absolute,
but that's what he's really doing.
Pretty radical things at the time. It's a pretty radical message. Really.
Yeah, I'm no expert on Spanish history, but it was a very peculiar time because there'd been a kind of golden age in the south of Spain just prior to this, where there were so many different peoples lived harmoniously together, and I think one of the things that Cervantes is hinting at by having a Moor telling the great Spanish story is that that Spain had been cosmopolitan, long before there were cosmopolitan cities. The south of Spain just had Jews, Moors, Christians, all living together quite happily, and which ended horribly, but I think he's playing on that quite a bit, and also the La Mancha that he paints is full of ghost towns. everywhere's empty because so many people have had to run away, leave, for fear the Jews fled, the Moors fled. So I think, that it's subliminal rather than at the forefront throughout the book. Occasionally there are characters that you meet who bring this up, and I make sure that I included one in the book. But this is the subtext. He's talking about he's talking about the golden age of chivalry, but he's also talking about the golden age of Spanish culture.
And this integrated, harmonious cultures living together. Interesting. And that, I imagine, would have had an appeal to you? The fact that even if it's not very explicitly the message, that it's a buried message that people can pick up on today.
Oh, there are so many. I mean, there's a feminist message in it as well. There's an extraordinary section with a beautiful feminist speech, and he does tackle so many modern issues. And again, this is part of the motivation for doing the book. It struck me how many people weren't actually aware of what was in that book. There's this great big dusty book that they didn't really want to touch because it was, oh God, how much effort is this going to be? And it contains so many wonders,
Exactly. You mentioned how we don't quite know how people responded or read Don Quixote at the time, but I mean, the second part of the book opens with reviews of the book. So, have you read some of it? Do we know what the critical reception at the time was to the book?
It was pretty good. Although, I mean, I think
did people get it?
Well, there's a 10-year gap, and well, as you know from reading my version, what actually happened was that somebody else took it upon themselves to do the second volume,
of course,
which was apparently terrible, and Spanish was pretty pissed off with it. But he did get a sponsor, which is what helped him be able to do the work for the second volume. So yeah, I think, but I think what he's really doing is he's playing with us, which is what he's doing all the way through. He's just drawing you in and playing with you. It's every writer has this. You have this peculiar relationship with the people that read your books, because on one hand it's terrifying because they're taking the thing that you and they might just read it like
yes.
And you're just like, I spent three years of my life every day doing that. But on the other hand, when you write, you know that you can only do half of the work because it doesn't exist until it's read. And that's really and that's what I think Cervantes realised himself. It's the readers that are making this book, and so that's why all of that peculiar contextual stuff that he's playing with is in there all the way through, because he's realising that it's that he's even saying himself that he's a reader of the book.
Reading his own book.
So and it's something that if you don't realise that as a writer, you're not a writer. It's one of the first things you have to realise is there is no implicit reading of any piece of work. You have to just let go of it. So as terrifying as that is.
Okay, and let me think about because actually I do feel quite honoured, by the way, that I am in the book. I don't remember the page number, I'm not that desperately vain, but
He does read it.
but it was perfect. It just worked out so well because when you had to refer to the reviews of the first volume, there had of course been reviews.
Exactly, but again, you see, that's what I was saying. So
of your book,
it created a gap. Well, the odd thing is that there's so much happened. I only had, I think it was about 6 to 8 months gap between the books where I wasn't doing them, and and so much happened in my life in that time as well. I got divorced. I got drunk for about 3 months, and so in the middle where we collected its 2 volumes, I just put a little note in where normally it kind of gives you a little idea of what Cervantes has been up to in between the 2 books, and I just added and my faithful adapter has also kind of gone off the rails as well, because it's it's in the nature of the text.
Yes.
It's kind of happening in the real time, and yet it happens in no time. There isn't actually a day that you can put on when any of this is happening. It makes no, as a timeline, it makes no sense at all. So it's kind of always happening in the present, which is good fun.
Which again I think makes the comic the perfect medium for it, because I've always felt with comics that you can just flick through it and you're seeing
it's like
stretches of time all there.
It's like a doll's house with lots of little windows in there.
Yeah.
It's just busy. There are lots of little squares and you're looking in, and they're all busying around the whole time.
Yeah, and you can't do that with, well, you can do it on a film with fast forward or something, but I mean,
No, it's just so linear.
You can move around so easily within a comic. It's a very special medium. And so it was, you were able to actually, fortunately, there were some reviews, some good reviews.
Unfortunately, did really well. But the first, I needed the earliest review. I mean, yours was, I think, might have been the first.
Was it really?
I think it might have been the first review. And so when I was writing so I had to add the bit where Don Quixote is finding out what the reception is to his stories. And so I thought, Paul had told me what you'd written for one of the national newspapers, and so I put that in for the British readers, so that they would sort of see, how could it's been reviewed in the meantime in a newspaper which they read, and it appears in the book. And I also put in, instead of using another newspaper reviewer, there's a famous cartoonist in the UK called Pat Anderson, and I bumped into him, and he said to me that he and his wife read it together in bed, and he used the phrase, I don't know if it's easy to translate, but he used the phrase, she laughed her tits off. And so I actually put that in the book as one of the reviews. Pat Anderson's wife said. So that's the two reviews that go in it.
Right. And did you make any amendments when the whole thing was put together, or was it fait accompli already by that point? Did you want to revise it at all? No.
Well, it's another one of the odd things about it is that when Cervantes died, he had no idea that he was doing this great volume. He didn't really know where it was going when it begins. And I think he had the same experience that I had, that it wasn't until Sancho turns up. Because when I was drawing the opening section, I did feel a little bit lost. It was quite difficult to write. And then suddenly Sancho turns up, and this conversation starts, and that's it. You're lost in that conversation then forever. It just goes on and on and on, and you could just listen to those two just bickering away.
It's one of the great double acts of all time.
Yeah. Well, it's an archetype. It's
Little and large,
Laurel and Hardy, R2D2 and C3PO. They are all Don Quixote and Sancho. They just look. There's the round one, tall thin one, and they poodle along together.
The tall one's the dreamer, and the round one's the down to earth. It does echo. Okay, and I'm sorry about this. I was going to hang some questions in my mind just a moment.
Okay.
Because that's what. Yes, I want to talk to you about other interpretations as in graphic interpretations of Don Quixote.
Right. Which one did you see?
Well, I saw there was a fantastic show of Honoré Daumier that was on the Royal Academy.
You wouldn't go that far back.
The Royal Academy had a show of his. He's an amazing painter.
Yeah.
Obviously, he's also a fantastic cartoonist. And I wondered if you looked at his. And Daumier did a lot.
It's beautiful stuff. It wasn't.
What about, were there Spanish illustrations of Don Quixote?
There are thousands of different illustrations of Don Quixote. But I mean, I think the two that you named there, I think they established an image that's kind of stuck of how the characters look. But I didn't so much take inspiration from that. But one of the things that I took most inspiration from is the famous Picasso drawing, which is just it's like a little thumbnail. I mean, I'm sure everyone knows it, and it's such an iconic image.
Did you do any more with that?
It's Picasso, isn't it? I mean, it's just genius in his sleep, And but it's the thing that I noticed, because I knew I was going to be telling a story, and there would be panels this size with full-length characters in. And what I loved was that you could tell which character was which, and so I really stripped down my Don Quixote so he was pencil thin and very angular. So it meant that even if they were just tiny little dots on the horizon, you could still tell which was which. One's a circle and one's a little kind of zigzag on a horse, And also that fits their characters, the shape of Sancho just kind of fits his peaceable kind of image, and Don Quixote's kind of angularity just fits his thoughts just dying and zipping away.
So Essentially, sort of literally more grounded and And the translation is, there's an interesting note in the front of this, is the Spanish edition, of course, with a note about the complication of putting you reading the English translation of the original Spanish, and then it has to get back from your English, which of course is already changed into Spanish. So the whole translation process, especially coming to the Spanish edition.
Well, he wrote a whole blog piece about what peculiar experience it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I think he really enjoyed it, but it's because as I've already mentioned, some of the things I did to try and bring the book up to date involved changing the language of peasants, so they just sounded like, to our ears, it would just sound like a peasant today, or somebody just, a rural farm worker, or and then he had the peculiar experience of trying to translate that into a Spanish equivalent,
But did the translator also, your Spanish translator, did he also refer back to the original? Try and find a way of incorporating more, perhaps, of that?
Well, he understood that I'd taken Don Quixote's speech directly from the book. I mean, occasionally I had to kind of truncate it a little bit, but it was so for that, he could go back to the original Spanish text, which was much more useful to him.
Right.
But it was all the characters around that he was just suddenly like, oh my god, because they're using all sorts of British colloquialisms and turns of phrase that people would recognise. So I'd be interested to know what you. If you speak Spanish and you read this, it'd be interesting to know quite how it reads. It's the thing that I always ask when, because it's been translated to German, French, Turkish, and so one of the things I always ask is I point to certain speech bubbles where I know it was an English joke that only English people would get, and so I want to know what does this say to you? Does it work? Well, they changed it. The Greek translator who I was lucky enough to sort of go out for a drink with, she was saying, explaining that what she'd done was gone to similar things in Greek and plays on words, so as they worked for a Greek readership, because obviously a play on words can get completely lost from one language to another.
I think let me open that to the audience. If you have any questions, I'd like to ask Rob about Don Quixote book, because we are really here to talk about. I talked about all the other stuff as well that we've done, but I thought we could
talk about anything like.
So we do. We'll see if anyone wants to ask any questions first. Otherwise, we can.
Would you please come up and speak to the microphone? Everybody can hear you.
Your question, Peter, thank you.
I just want, Rob, if you would describe his workroom.
Oh, yeah.
Describe my workroom. Have you ever seen a picture of it? It's chaos. My workroom, I have a giant drawing table that was used for designing aircraft. It's enormous, and it's got all these kind of gadgets that kind of allow it to move in all sorts of peculiar directions. And I have that, so I draw standing up. Back gets ruined otherwise, and the computer work's done sitting down, so it kind of keeps me moving. But in between, there's just strewn books and records, and I live in chaos. It's how I work. It's order out of chaos.
Because the work has to be organised. And what about the time period? It was 3 years working on the whole thing. With a gap,
each book.
What about each page or something? Each scene?
I did a page a day.
Right.
And
definitely in sequence or just literally?
Always. Well, that was the other thing. On my wall, there's a year calendar, so it's a full year view, and it will have a page number written on every single day. So
did you take Christmas off?
I think I did. I can't remember.
Treated yourself to a day off.
I don't remember. But like I said, I got divorced afterwards, so I wasn't the most popular person in our house. But I did. It works for me because it's a nice feeling to start each day on a new page, design it, draw it, colour it, letter it,
but
and then I
you must have done thumbnails and little sketches of the whole thing, perhaps to map it out, or was it literally?
No. I had a breakdown, then I wrote a script.
That's not the nervous breakdown, it's the breakdown of the page. Yes.
I had a few breakdowns as well, I'm sure.
But it was literally one page at a time, looking through.
Yeah, well, I wrote a full script first.
Yeah, right.
Because some artists that write and draw, they don't actually write a script. They'll work on the page as they're doing it. I wrote a full script because I wanted to get the dialogue to work, because it's so crucial to it that it has a kind of natural flow. So there's a page every day, and so some days the page will be done quickly and I'll be finished in the afternoon, and so I get the rest of the day off. Other days I'm there till maybe 3 or 4 in the morning until it's finished. But
And what's been the reception to the book? I mean, what have the reviews been, apart from my glowing one in the Times supplement? I mean, have you encountered people going, well, this is good, you've ruined it, or you've left something wonderful out? My favourite passage has been left out, or something.
Not many. It wasn't actually in a review. I mean, to be honest, all the reviews have been really good, and the Spanish ones were particularly good. Somebody says it's the best adaptation of Don Quixote anyone's done.
Well, not just in comics, but
in any medium, which that's fantastic.
Yeah.
However, there was a student in the audience when I did a talk at the Cervantes Institute in Greece, and he had obviously been studying Don Quixote, and he even had the page numbers of everything written down, and I could see him even when I was doing the talk. I could see he was waiting for his chance to do this. And, so he gave me a real examination on why I'd left out certain speeches that Don Quixote makes in certain scenes, and it was
And what were your answers to that? Was it,
very similar to, it took a while to kind of get him to climb down a little bit, because he was very set that there was this implicit interpretation of the book, and there's a particular speech, and he said that speech has to be in because it's so crucial. And I was trying to explain to him that the speech he was talking about is referred to, but it's not explicitly in the book. And in the end, I just said to him, well, if for example, a 7-year-old or an 8-year-old was to read this, and it just happened to be the greatest reading experience that they have in their life, then you can't say to them, you read it wrong. That when you're 40, you'll read it right. It doesn't work like that. You have a reading of work, and that's you're welcome to that. I get this. The book that I did after this, I've had readers. I had a girl message me to tell me how she had understood the full meaning of the book that I did, and this huge message went on and on, explaining all about her life and how did you understand. Well, I had no idea what she was talking about. As far as I thought I wrote a completely different book, but I just said the message that I sent her back was just the same as I've just said here. It's your book, it's not mine. That's your reading, it's your experience. It's great. It's not for me to tell her, well, no, that wasn't meant to be like that. It's whatever.
It must be rather wonderful that someone's been so moved by it. It's really connected to them. We should talk briefly about that, because the Motherless Oven, is that in any way quixotic, or I don't know if it is. It's certainly got enough very strange imaginative ideas in it.
Yeah, I guess there's something in why I would choose to do this book, when you see that's the kind of stuff I write myself. So it's an original. It's an original work.
Touched on that. Your background, you came up through the UK self-published small press scene.
Yeah,
you've already done. I remember getting copies of Slam when it was coming out.
Yeah, that was a long time ago. Yeah.
And then you went through various routes through the newsstand comics and 2018 things like that. And Doctor Who, of course, all that sort of stuff. But I didn't really want to be part of that. It's like merchandise creating. Where what you're really doing is you're selling somebody else's product, and it's much as I love comics, it's the medium that I love as a storytelling medium, and I wanted to tell my own stories. But in order to do that, it's very difficult to find somebody to pay you to do that, and pay you enough money that you can actually eat and have somewhere to live. To do that is a big.
It's massive.
It's a big transformation now to have major publishers and new ones like Self-Made Hero in the UK commissioning, making that possible. And then I'm right in saying that Motherless Oven was the first thing that you've written of length of your own.
It was since I was self-publishing.
Yeah, since self-publishing, going back to making your own comics.
So it took that long to almost kind of earn the opportunity for somebody to just give me a blank sheet and say, right, here is the money to make a book. You can do whatever you like. And that's, I'm really grateful that they gave me that opportunity. And it's changed a lot of things for me.
And what was the experience like of making your own full-length graphic novel, The Motherless Oven? How did you come together? How did you form it? How did you shape it?
I work the same way. I mean, I've still got that. For that, I still have the big thing on the wall with a page written on every day. You see, and the same process and a full script.
But what was the sparking point for The Motherless Oven? What was there an image or a concept, a story that you particularly felt was?
I wanted to do something different. I just wanted to do something that was a new reading experience for people that they wouldn't be able to get anywhere else. That was, and I had an idea, which was a simple idea, which might sound a little bit crazy, which was the idea of children building their parents rather than parents creating children. I just thought, well, it was a nice inverted idea, and I thought, it all came out of that simple idea.
But not such a simple idea. What began that idea? Most people don't think like that.
I suppose
Did you feel that was it you reflecting on your life of how maybe you are, or were you not the product of your parents, or reversing that and saying I don't want to be that?
Well, no, I think philosophically, I think it's true. I think that the parents are created by children. Really, you invent them. The person has a name, they're called John or Steve, and then suddenly they become this thing called Dad, and that then becomes their existence. It's true symbolically, and it's true metaphorically, but I just made it literally true in the story because it just gave me an opportunity to create a completely alternative world and give it its own laws.
And in this world, it literally does rain knives. The rain is deadly. There are falling knives. It's got such a fantastic surreal imagery, but laden with symbolism and undercurrents all the way through it. And it has that. It also must have tied into your, I'm assuming, to some of your school experiences. It's set in a school, isn't it? So it comes out of that.
Well, I'm always a little bit cautious when it comes to that question of how much of this is you.
Well, I know
of course, you're always in a because again, it's like it starts to make a single literal reading, and of course this happens to a lot of writers where somebody finds out things that happened in their life, and then they say, that's what he's saying, and it's they're creating an imaginative work. It's and obviously the palette that you have to work with is your own life. So that's the colours that you have. That's the the bedrock that you build any work on. So it's natural that So yes,
But then there's the imagination, there's fantasy, there's
I was homeless. I slept on rooftops. I went to a school that had similar things happen, and all of those things happened in my life. That's what happens to those characters is about what happens to the characters in the book. There's lots of it that's completely irrelevant to me. So
it's not by any means just a life story.
No.
But it's definitely one of the greatest books that came out, I think, in the UK last year. I think
very much cool.
Really, and hopefully are you going to be messaging, doing some adaptation or a follow-up to that?
Is that? It's called The Cat and His Daughter.
Wonderful. And that'll be the same format. So a two-part book. Three? How much
There will be a third.
Because it is left somewhat pregnantly, at the end where we're not quite sure. I thought, well, maybe there'll be some more.
Yeah, there is.
Was that planned from the beginning?
It was, but the publisher wasn't sure whether or not they wanted to commit to 3 books.
Yes.
So there we go. In that case, similar to Don Quixote. I did the first book, and it had to have a completeness to it, which it does because it's the story of that particular character. The next book is a story of a different character
in the same world.
You can probably guess which one it is from the title. Just get that.
Brilliant. Good. Okay, so do we have some questions from the audience? Otherwise, I think we're wrapping up a little bit. Would anyone like to ask something?
Well, I would like to to make some commentary.
Please do.
No, yeah, thanks a lot. It's just beautiful. It's so nice to hear Vitidu Cervantes. You talk about our patron. And I think you guys tackle on almost all the important issues. They have been discussed forever in the literary community, the scientific community, the iconology or the pictography. Then also, I would like to congratulate you to continue writing what Cervantes began. And I don't know if you know that after the first edition of the first part, Cervantes announced the second part. And there was another author who came to before him, Avellaneda, and published the second part. Now, we don't know if this guy is Cervantes or not, or another one. And Cervantes, yeah, exactly. And Cervantes refers to him in the second part, which means all that what you mentioned has been going on in the novel. Yes.
What is the feeling about this possibly this second part? Is it bad? Is it ignored? Is it not?
What the Avellaneda?
Yeah.
The Quixote Apocryphal. No, it's not ignored. No, we will have an autumn a whole symposium on it. Yeah, right. It's actually fun. It's really fun. And I see, as far as I know, that the English translation of Quixote was the first translation. Right. Yes. And you keep in your, I think, in the spelling, the old Castilian spelling going, which the Spanish don't do anymore. Right. They changed it. Yeah. So including in the letters, there's a continuing flux and change. And I heard from Europe Secretary Egmont that they did translate from your text into German, which I think is a splendid idea in the idea of Cervantes, how literature should be working. Referring to Sita Ahmed Benengeli, who was the first translator of it. And,
in German?
No, from Arabic into Spanish. And Cervantes found him in Toledo. Right. So I think we are talking all in all in the Cervantes original, the 2 volumes, about 8 translators that show up on the long line. So it's fantastic. And here I see also that the Egmont, they refer to Quixote as Ritter vor der traurigen Gestalt, which is the classical expression from Tieck here in the German translation. So I really enjoy all this mixture of languages, of dialogue between audiences and histories and historical moments, and the same thing with the imagery. I think it is Picasso at the end of the day who forged the modern mind. I want to talk about Don Diego, the classical. And then you have this, what you described very nicely, this very high and slender figure, and Sancho Panza, Panza means the stomach, like street. And it's like often referred to in the Spanish world as the exclamation mark and the question mark. So it fits really in nicely, and your figure, as far as I see, is a really wonderful variation on it.
Thank you very much. There's one last thing I wanted to just bring up, which I enjoyed reading an interview I found online with Ernesto Priego of Comics Group, which I thought would be a nice way to conclude.
What did I say?
That in many ways, people like yourself working in this form of comics, where you're not necessarily being paid very well, you're not working for the giant companies, the superheroes. I mean, you're someone like it's very quixotic existence, because all of us that believe in comics being something worthwhile. We're always tilting at windmills ourselves.
Well, I think he, in some ways, Don Quixote is the kind of patron saint of writers and artists, because that's what he's doing is exactly what we do all the time. We just live in an imagined version of reality, and we try to create something better, and something wondrous out of our experiences, and we end up looking a little bit mad and being a little bit outside.
Yes,
it's a natural thing for us.
At least part of the time you're in the world of your imagination and what you're creating.
It's a natural state of affairs for artists to be outside. It's just the way it is.
So let me heartily endorse that you pick up the German edition, which is available from Egmont. Have we got copies here? I believe we have.
Yes.
Marvellous, thank you, Julia. And can I ask you to thank Rob Davis for a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much.